right, hi, this is Dan Henk. Welcome to Skull Sessions. And today my guest is, we just talked about this, Matthew Carauddo.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That was good. Wow. Got the right the first time. All right, man. So what do you got going on?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show, Dan. I appreciate it. I know that you're obviously a big, horror fan and whatnot, and like that's kind of your kind of go-to in terms of, maybe writing and just in general, like the kinds of things you enjoy. And I just want to say that like some of my favorite films and works in the past are ironically horror related, even though a lot of the work that I've done actually had to do more with like live Star Wars performances, which we can get into later if you want to learn about what I did with that. But for example, one of my favorite films of all time was Dead Alive, also known as Brain Dead, I think
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
UK or whichever. Now, the irony with that, really quick, is, I mean, here we are in Halloween time. I mean, I don't know when this video will be released, but it's basically Halloween time for 2024. Um,
It's
but
always Halloween.
Exactly, like, excuse me. But so one of my favorite things that I don't know if listeners know this, but so like I had a ch I had a chance to see Dead Alive back in the day, and I was like, this is fucking great. I can't believe it. Oh, pardon my French. But anyway, so
Well,
then
I don't fucking care. You can curse wherever you want here. Yeah.
got it, copy that. But so anyway, this is like way back in, I want to say it was like college for me. Anyway, fast forward, and then other movies came out with Peter Jackson, obviously. But here's the thing, right? Then Lord of the Rings is coming, and I'm, hearing about, oh, that's friggin' great! Like, what a great idea! Like,
Which, by the
finally,
way, I love Lord of the Rings.
well, oh yeah, well, we'll can get to all that too, because I'm sure people are maybe they have different ways of thinking on it. But here's my point: is then I was like, oh, that's a great idea. I wonder who they're, I wonder who they're gonna get to direct it. And then time goes by, and then you find out. I'm like, oh my God, Peter Jackson is directing
Yeah.
this. That is a great idea. And they're like, who the hell is Peter Jackson? I'm like, oh yeah, that's true. You wouldn't really know anything about him because it's not like he's not
In
Spielberg,
the
he's not
mainstream, yeah.
George Lucas.
You
He's
know what
not.
I heard? You know that movie, The Virgin Suicides? It was kind of like a critical hit, like indie hit. So
Right,
before that, it's like Dead Alive, Bad Taste, all that sort of stuff. And you're like,
right.
how did they pick that guy? Well, the way they did
Oh,
is
you know the
he did The
story. Yeah,
Virgin
it's a long
Suicide.
story.
Yeah, yeah. And I was like, I mean, I thought it was great because I think he's a great director, but I was like,
Yeah,
I was like, what made them pick that guy? But it was the Virgin Suicides. That was why.
I
So
will
they
say
didn't
this.
even know. And they gave him a budget, and he said $100 million. So they gave him a budget, and he made the first movie for 100 million. And they
Right.
go, oh, looks great. Where's the other two? He goes, oh, you gotta give me more money. They're freaking out.
Yeah, and I will say this too, is that there are several shots in Lord of the Rings, especially the one with Ian McKellen popping up and going, is it safe? Is it secret? He's like completely in the lens. The lens is obviously a telephoto distort. You know what I'm trying to say. And the point is, like, I'm like, man, like you can tell, you can smell, taste, and feel Peter Jackson's horror style. Not, I don't want to say bleeding into the film as if it's a bad thing, but that it's being applied in a fantastic way because I would argue that if you were to take Lord of the Rings and shoot it straight with only like the most basic lenses and very traditional, and we will only have very
Yeah.
pretty looking shots and everything, it could take
Very
away.
stiff. It looked very stiff. Yeah.
Well, what I mean by that is this, right, Dan, is we're sitting here talking on a kind of a horror aspect. This is kind of your focus is it takes away the visceral kind of
The
doom
gut
and
punch. Yeah.
yeah, like Lord of the Rings is meant to be a psychological journey for. I was just talking to someone else on a different interview about this, that most of the strongest heroes' journeys that persist throughout the course of history, they end up being the heroes going on, or many heroes are going on a psychological journey that actually is in a way in precedence to their physical journey. I mean, it's not arguable that obviously Frodo had a physical journey to go with Sam, and so did all the other characters. Nobody's arguing that. Obviously he's going to go to this volcano. They're going to walk there instead of, take a train or a horse or fly, whatever. But the point is, it's an arduous journey, but way more psychological with the thing that was around his neck,
Right.
and without the horror aspects being applied and placed into the audience's eyes for them to really soak it in and take it seriously is what I mean to say. Because, right, someone might say, what's a friggin' ring? What the fuck? What's the problem? I mean, who
Yeah.
cares? Like, how could that be a ring?
But I think you need those extremes, I kind of like stuff that has like a dark element. So I don't
Right.
care if it's a Western, I don't care if it's fantasy, I don't care if it's sci-fi. But if it's sci-fi and it's like super like bland and boring and like I'm not a big
It's
fan of
away
Star
from.
Trek. Like I like the later Star Treks, but I like the ones like with the Wrath of Khan and stuff, like the ones that get dark. But
Right.
if it's just like, middle of the road, you're right. It doesn't have that gut punch, and you need that gut punch.
Yeah. And I will also add this, I'm glad that you brought up Star Trek is I really, really loved that they brought Christopher Plummer aboard. I forget if it was Star Trek 5 or 6, but it was Undiscovered Country. And
Hmm.
that they
I
then
think it's
also,
five, yeah.
yeah, excuse me, because I sometimes get the numbers. I love 4. 4 is one of my favorites. But anyway,
Unfortunately, Whale one, right?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that was so good. Like what a great like overall thematic thing to say. Let's just have them be on Earth. Like that would be
I
cool.
don't know. My favorite though is the Wrath of Khan. I mean, with
Well,
that
of course.
worm they drop in the ear and stuff. I mean, come on.
And you
I mean, but
cannot
that's horror. Yeah.
you cannot fault Ricardo Montalban. I mean, his
Oh, he's
delivery is
awesome. Yeah.
well, and that's the thing is, this is why what I'm saying is to compare Christopher Plummer and him, and the reason being is you need that kind of not just villain who's like, rah, 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 ha ha, ah ha ha. It's like that's a little too
Yeah,
magoo.
you
It's a
need
little
substance.
too.
You need substance to the character to like bring them out. Yeah.
It's and also when the lines are there, like one of the best lines that I'm sure everybody
Well,
remembers
that
from
helps
Wrath of
provide the
Khan.
substance. Yeah.
Yeah, is like when Wrath of Khan, where he's like, and when I bring my ship around, I mean also to deprive you of your life, Captain Kirk. And you're
Mhm.
like, geez, like these lines are all so great. Like, sure, the performances, sure, the voice, sure, Ricardo Montalban's look, but just the lines where they were that Shakespearean really brought it about. And that's why I'm saying with Christopher Plummer, I loved that he was going the whole to be or not to be. Ah, famous Klingon line, Captain Kirk. Do you not agree? And you're like, these are so cool, especially when he's like, hey, we need breathing room. And he's like, Hitler, 1935, Earth. Or whatever
Yeah.
it was. I was like, this is good stuff. This is the kind of stuff you want to see in those kind of films. But also, like you mentioned, it has that dark and edgy and kind of gruesome, like this isn't playtime, today. Like people are gonna get their asses handed to them.
Yeah, I look at the Klingons when they're more the orcs in Lord of the Rings or something, when they're
Yeah,
like the bad guys, once they like familiarize them and they're like, oh, they're cool, they're just a little different. Yeah, it kind of took away the mystique.
yeah,
Like I think the first movie is like very hit or miss, but I think the best thing when the Klingon birds of prey come in and that wormhole thing like zaps them with like electricity and dissolves the ships. I was like, that is awesome.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But all right, man. So uh, I guess this probably leads into kind of like the inspiration between behind what you have going on.
Oh well, so like I mean, if people can find out more about my work if they want by visiting the website, it's diamond-dragons.com, and then you can see the cover. Excuse me, the cover to book 3 here. Obviously, there's 3 books. I've actually, as of the time of this recording, I'll be releasing book 4 over the winter solstice of 2024, and I've kind of released the first half of it over the summer solstice, the sort of digital version. And I won't go into all the details with that. People can find out on the website. There's no need for it. But since again, this is your focus is sort of horror, um, I'm kind of excited to talk to you about this because it's like Diamond Dragons has a lot of horror elements, but they would otherwise not be known if people were to just take it at face value and go, Diamond Dragons, oh, that's cool. It sounds like fantasy and a bunch of dragons flying around and that's it. I'd be like, well, that's true, but there are all these elements of horror. And so, for example, in Diamond Dragons 2, well, there's a lot in Diamond Dragons 1, but in 2, there's a scene where a certain type of dragons, bad guys in this case, they have like a dungeon, and so they enslave themselves. They enslave their own people, and their own dragons or whatever to like work in the what do you call them, in the furnaces and whatnot, like shoveling coal and this kind of stuff and keep these things going. I mean, I'm kind of having to shorten what the hell's really going on. Otherwise, we'd be here for a long time explaining.
Well, people have to read the books, see it. I was just
Yeah,
gonna what I thought of immediately when you were talking about all this is like all that like classic fantasy stuff had a very dark element. Like
yeah,
the early Conans, the early Canes, they all had like there were witches and warlocks and evil creatures and stuff. I think they kind of like mellowed and dumbed it down for early TV because they thought that the audience couldn't handle it, but it
right.
was
I mean,
always there.
and that's the thing is like, so in books, you have that freedom to be able to say, well, I don't care if this ever becomes a film and they want to try to cut things out and make it unrated or whatever. But here's my point is, so during this dungeon scene, which is one of many, and many to come throughout the series or whatever, there is, of course, like this one uh, overarching commander, and she is sort of under the big, kahuna guy. Anyway, she sees one slave, falls down, and this slave cannot perform anymore. And of course, we want to say, get up, so she takes her sort of huge flail. And again, this is a dragon. She could just spit fire at it, but instead they insist on whipping them with these chain whips. Just so I have this torturous scene where she literally whips one to death, and then she's
A dragon?
yeah, it's really hard to explain, but it's pretty gruesome. Like on
Uh,
purpose, it's gruesome. And also, all the other ones are chanting. They keep basically chanting death, 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 and you're kind of like, oh my God, this sounds demonic. And these guys are up. And so the point is, I want that motif for these particular characters so that when they encounter the heroes, which happens later, and again, I'm sort of fast forwarding here through the story. People might say this is confusing already. I'm like, yeah, you have to read. This unfolds over chapters, but I mean, finally, when they meet, you're going, oh man, this is a different breed of enemy, not the previous enemies that they met, which were far more cerebral, intelligent, and sort of like, sort of just like a regular match between two, a hero and a villain. This is more like a very barbaric villain where they wouldn't take prisoners, so to speak, and they would be brutal and demonic. So again, in a way, it's sort of like if you were to say the difference between, um, in Lord of the Rings, Sauron as an enemy force versus the orcs themselves. You know what I mean? Like, there's the difference between an intelligent villain, but one that kind of has, in a certain way, honor and a certain way of fighting in a kind of, honorable way, as I guess I should say, versus the way the orcs would just be like, dude, we're just brutal. We'll just beat you down.
well, I think people they love to anthropomorphize stuff, so it's like the like one thing I like. I'm a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft stuff, and one thing I really like about Lovecraft is like he didn't try and make them as human as possible. It's like they're
Right,
these weird creatures. So it's like when they do stuff that we find horrible, they don't even know what it is. To them, that's just natural.
right,
So, that could be that. I think that's even darker because, like, if you're malevolent, okay, yeah, there are a lot of fucked up people. Like, I'm not a big fan of like slasher movies. Is like, yeah, you're fucked up. There's a lot of fucked up people. I don't care. I just want a good story. Yeah,
right,
and obviously, fantasy can have a good story. I mean, look at Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones was like until that last season, which really like jumped the shark, or nuked the fridge or whatever. Until then, it was the best thing on TV. It was so good. And I remember going to Scotland, and I've been to Scotland like 7 times, but I remember going to Scotland when I've been out for like I think 2 seasons or 3 seasons. There were billboards. Everybody was watching it in Scotland. So
The
if you do
power of
fantasy right,
marketing.
I think that's when it really takes over. Like when people, they denigrate like fantasy or horror or sci-fi, because yeah, you saw the bad version of it, but there are some that really break the boundary and like really pop out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I haven't actually seen tons of Game of Thrones. I just, not that I'm not a fan or anything, it's just I never got around to being able to do all that stuff. But I mean, I'm a huge fan of George R. R. Martin for many reasons. One, most specifically, of like his interviews. I like uh, watching his interviews and like hearing what he has to say about writing. And he's so different from me as a creator. I like that. You know, some people I find it's very interesting that they only want to hear the same things that they do or the same things that they feel, and that's it. And I'm like,
That
man,
seems
that's
kind of
not good.
boring.
You're in a huge danger of being in an echo chamber. Isn't it better in some ways for you to hear from artists or people who have a different perspective? Not that they're trying to negate what you are and say, haha, you bad, me good. More so that they're like, oh, that's interesting. This is how you approach writing? Interesting. I do it like this. And we both get to the same end result and finish our products, but very interesting. And for example, Dan, like I found it interesting that George was like, "Oh, I don't really write anything down. I don't keep like laborious notebooks and all that. I keep it all up in here." And he had this one famous quote in this interview where he's like, "So I guess if I get hit by a bus, it's a bad thing for you guys," you know. And he's like, it's really
You'll
funny.
never know how it is. Yeah.
Well, so and that's something I found interesting, Dan. Like I know again we were kind of maybe talking necessarily about the horror specifically, but for me what I liked most about George is just his way of going about writing. Not to mention the fun interview where he and Steve so Stephen King were on the stage together, and then there was some wonderful things that they had to say, in the audiences asking questions and things like that. But anyways, then Stephen says, "Hey, well, George, we're coming to a close here. If you have any questions for me, now is the time," kind of thing. And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, Stephen, I do have a question for you. How the fuck do you write so goddamn fast?" And everybody just died because it was like, well, there you have it. Everybody wants to ask that question. And of course, Stephen answered it in his, unequivocally awesome way of saying, look, entropy tries to intervene, but I write 6 pages a day. Like, sure, there's doctor's appointments. You got to send a care package. You got to go to the whatever. And he's just like, but this is how I do it. And I plan it out that way. I can say, well, if I write X and Y and Z, and then a month go by, he's like, in 2, 3 months, I'll have a book. I mean, obviously not a complete one. There's still editing, but I mean, he's just like, this is how I operate. And again, who could have been in the room to be two different writers, George and Steve, who both create these interesting masterpieces, but their approaches are, if you were to say, let's get you both in a car, set you on the path, and see which roads you take, they wouldn't take the same roads now, would they, Dan?
Right. Yeah, well, I think like first of all, I think Stephen King had some brilliant ideas, and one of his real strengths is like making characters seem realistic, like the dialogue and like the character traits and the personalities and so on. I think probably one thing you could do, if I were to critique, and I should critique Stephen King because he obviously way outsells me, but the one thing I would critique is he has these awesome stories, and it doesn't feel like he gave them time to ruminate, to polish, to like, you know,
Interesting.
because like the biggest critique of Stephen King is his endings. It's like it was a great idea, but then this happened, and I mean I don't know because everyone they handle stuff differently. They
I
they
think
make
that's
stuff
it.
differently. But like I do when I write, I do extensive notes, and there are plenty of people that I've interviewed for this podcast, and they're what are called pantsers. They like
Right.
right by the seat of their pants. They had no notes whatsoever. So I mean,
Right.
the end result is whatever makes a good story.
Right. And I mean, Dan, this is exactly what we're talking about and I guess everybody can feel differently, but the way that I feel is it's great if there is variety in the way people work. What isn't so great, and this is the caveat that makes it difficult to have a conversation with people without them getting angry at you, is let me explain. My background is 30 plus years in theater and performance and film and sound design and video ed. I mean, like I've been around, like I've done fight choreography. People can see that via my website too. They can go and look at my old channel where I did live Star Wars style fight work performances. And I mean, this ain't no fucking joke, man. Like this is like we did some serious work out there. Now, granted, I don't have billions of views, but I had some videos in the past that were seen, over 1 million times. So that's a thing. But here's my point is so I come from a background where preparation and planning and organization and structure were really important in order to achieve the result that was desired from the production, whatever it was. Now, granted, some people might argue, well, I don't like to know the ending of my story before I start writing my stuff because then it ruins the surprise for me and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, I understand your thought process there, but do you understand how that could be very deleterious to storytelling and why it would be you start
Like the
writing
arc, yeah.
your characters are not going anywhere. And the reason they're not going anywhere is because they're wandering and they're going off in whatever the hell directions that they want. Whereas if you actually have a destination in mind, the way I look at it is sometimes I'm like, it's kind of like if you're playing football. If you can see the end zone, if you know the end zone is your goal, then you can head towards it. But if you have no idea where the end zone is, it's like if you got in your car and you're like, hey, Dan, you ready to drive? And you're like, yeah. Where the hell are we going? And I'd be like, I don't know. Who cares? You'd be like, what the hell are we doing in the car then?
Just drive, just drive. Yeah.
And that's okay. Some people would say, well, I do that from some time. I'm like, yeah, but you don't do that
I don't.
95% of the time of
Yeah.
the week. You are either going to work, you're going to get your groceries, you're going to do something. You have a destination in mind. So from my perspective, it doesn't mean that you need to solidify every single little thing all the way and say we will never deviate, we may not make a left turn, we may not. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the general destination that you're like, my heroes need to get from A to Z, and then they need to blow up the Death Star, they need to get the
Right.
ring into the volcano, they need to the Matrix, I need to destroy the agents, whatever. But when you have that, then you know that whatever scenes you write, you will be constantly thinking, am I pushing my characters towards the exit, towards the finish line? And if I am not doing that, what the hell am I doing? Am I doing this
I
right?
mean,
Am I sidestepping to develop their character a little bit? Or could I also develop their character and move them towards the destination simultaneously? That sounds like a better deal, but we'll see which one I can pull off. So I look at it like that, Dan, is that it's important. I mean, one of my favorite lines comes from not even me, an award-winning writer, where he's just like, you should know the ending before you begin. And I've actually worked that into my own writings, which is some of the poetry that comes from Diamond Dragons. The first few lines, when you open up the book and read book one, it says, before I start, I must see my end. So you're like, oh,
I
sounds.
like I like to that you brought up poetry because one of my favorite writers I did a class with him and everything, like a seminar, is Alan Moore. He wrote Watchmen, he wrote a bunch of stuff, V for Vendetta, his
Oh,
based on
yeah, I
his
love it.
work, you know a whole I can't even count everything. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I mean all this stuff. And unfortunately, he wrote it and he was like, it should be in its original form. You shouldn't make it into a movie or a TV or whatever. And the thing is, like, I mean, I would say that's up to the creator or whatever they think is going to express their work. But they basically said, okay, well, we have part of the right, so we're taking it, we're going to do it, regardless of what you think. So, I mean, we're not going to delve into that. I'm just saying, like his approach to stuff is, he really likes to write stuff out, like like extensive notes and storyboards and everything. But then he leaves it open enough that he doesn't definitely know what's going to happen and everything. Even the ending is a little bit like fudgeable, although he has a more or less ending plan. And I
Yeah,
think
that makes
that's
sense.
a great approach because as you go along, you can go, okay, well, ultimately I'm going to get to this goal, but maybe I'll rework it a little bit, or maybe I'll take this side venture or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah,
No, I was
I think
thinking,
that's a good approach.
right, Dan, I'll put it this way. Is often I'm on these writers' threads and forums and whatnot. I don't know if anybody who's watching would even recognize me. Who knows? But all too often, I'll say something about like, I think outlining is important. I think this, and you should know your end, and then people will, well, sometimes they get in my face and they'll be a little bit, catty about it. I don't really care. I don't take anything personally. But I look at it like they will say, "Oh, well, I don't like to have everything super hyper rigid and everything like that." I'm like, no one's saying that. No one's saying that the outline of something is immutable and you cannot change anything. It's just like when people make a building. Okay, so we're talking about contracting right now. You do not just run out into the street and start building a house or a 4 story or a 10-story building. You not only, we'll skip all the schematics and the land zoning and all, we'll skip all that, but we'll just say, even when you build the structure, the beams in place or whatever, you don't know what the end result is going to be, and that's fine. But you do know that you're going to build X floors. This building is probably going to be a blah, 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 blah type of building. We're probably going to use this type of wood paneling or whatever. You know the general little kind of details and things like that. But that also doesn't mean that somehow throughout the process, say 30, 40% through the process, someone goes, Bill, come over here. Listen, I was thinking it might be better if we go with this because I don't think this other thing's going to work anymore. I mean, I thought it was at the beginning, and didn't you? And he's like, yeah, maybe you're right. You change something for the better of the project. And that's really what I want to get to here, Dan, is that the reason that I think it's important to have an outline is because that's great for the project. But also the reason to change little details along the way is because it's good for the storytelling or the character arcs or the color palettes.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. Like,
Yeah.
I get where you're going with that. It's like that's kind of what people should do, in my opinion. I mean, I can't really because the only real result is whether or not it's good or not. But I think that like constructing something, probably one of the best ways to go about it is to like plan a little bit of it before you delve into it.
It's hard to, I'll put it this way too, is that for me, and I could be wrong about this, but to me it makes logical sense as opposed to someone trying to make it an opinion, is it's very difficult to do key kinds of foreshadowing
Mhm.
or forewords or even red herrings when you don't know what's coming later. Because then the thing is, you need to go backward and plug it in and reprogram it in. So the way I look at it is, why do that when what you should probably be thinking is going, ooh, this will be a particularly good time for this character to
Well, I
say
will
a
admit
line,
that I've come
because
up
then
with
it
something that I thought,
foreshadows the future of them, of this thing that's going to happen to them later, which I already know is coming, but I haven't written it yet. So I look at it like that's a great way to actually do foreshadowing. Otherwise, I mean, think about it, bar none, logically, if you're doing foreshadowing, but you don't plan anything and you just write as you go in a contiguous sort of linear sort of sequential sequence, by default you must go back to set your foreshadowing in place. Otherwise you wouldn't possibly be able to have it because you can't foreshadow something that you don't know is there. Am I wrong?
yeah, no, what I was gonna say is like I have done. I mean, that's right, but I have done the thing where like I come up with an idea and I have to go back and write in earlier stuff to make that later thing, applicable. But it's better if you plan everything out ahead of time. But I mean, you should
Well, maybe
always
not
be open.
everything, but most everything, like the
Yeah,
key things. Like if you're like, I
the
really
general
want.
thesis. Yeah.
Yeah, like for example, I make a lot of bullet points with all of my Diamond Dragons books, and also all the projects I've done before, where I'm like, okay, what's the structure of this entire piece? This character, this, then this, they meet this thing happens, they drop the sword, this person's killed, this person sacrifices the blah 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 whatever. And that doesn't mean that all those components won't move around or sometimes just get completely deleted. I might later be like, I really wanted the scene where Dupre and Jack Ralvian have this discussion and they're kind of at button heads about, elderly Jamoto and all this other stuff. But it's just, I don't need it anymore. It's already covered in this other scene, and I got this thing, and it just sort of takes away the rhythm. I'm gonna take that out. Maybe I can put this in another book, or maybe it just doesn't need to be done at all. That's how I kind of roll, Dan. Is I'll think of a scene that is powerful, that moves things forward in certain ways. But sometimes, even if the scene is excellent, and we've all seen this with deleted scenes from films, where we'll be like, holy crap, like that's a great, why did they delete that? I'm like, it
Right.
was probably for time, pacing, and other certain relevance that scene in and of itself is powerful. But try to plug it in somewhere in the movie, and you'll be like, oh yeah, oh that doesn't make sense because they're in the wrong location. Oh shit, you can't.
Well,
Okay,
also
let's
those
put that scene here.
those Hollywood marketers think that they're smarter than the writers who came up with the brilliant material that they're putting out,
Right.
which is definitely not the case. And I was going to say, I was going to ask you more about what you have going on, but one point that I wanted to make, one thing that really bugs me, like I've been on forums and people are like, and we talk about research and they're like, oh, I never do any research. It's like, well, you know, it depends, but if it's like something that's very real and then you portray it incorrectly, it kind of like,
It reflects badly on you, yeah.
reflects badly on your entire work. It's kind of hard to like take the rest seriously when you read that previous incorrect passage. But what I was gonna ask is like, so all right, I know people hate to do this, but if you had to compare your work to something out there, what would you say? Like, if you're into this, you would be into my stuff.
Oh, right. No, I understand. I think it's actually really powerful for people to identify excellent comparisons of their work, not necessarily in saying, I am just like Steven Spielberg and da da da.
Right,
That's
right.
not what we're talking about. We're talking about
I
like,
think it's what a lot of people are scared of.
no, that's a really good topic to bring up, Dan. I would say this. So first of all, I think comparisons are powerful, or they can be, in terms of not saying, I am Steven Spielberg and I'm exactly like no one necessarily needs to see a clone of another person out there. That's not what's going on. But it's like it can help identify style, mood, themes, overall feel and pacing and whatnot. Like, think of the difference between Spielberg's pacing and style to someone like Denis Villeneuve, who did Blade Runner 2049, which is a brilliant film. If people haven't seen that, they really need to see it. It's fantastic. And Batista, by the way, is chef's kiss. Brilliant in it. Hell yeah, Dave. But anyway, so it's like, for me, all art is a good medium for making homages to things that really touched you or inspired you. And I would argue, without a doubt, it's impossible for people to refute this, but with Diamond Dragons, there are so many homages, it would make your ears bleed. Um, I'll quickly make a few notes, but we'll see. Who knows who's watching or listening who would actually even know these things. So, not a lot of, many homages that are buried in Diamond Dragons, whether they're right in your face or they're like kind of subtle in the background, are homages to like all sorts of projects, such as video games from a company called New World Computing back in the day, which was John Van Caneghem and his team of folks, and they created the Might and Magic series of games. They also created the Heroes of Might and Magic series of games, which are still popular to this day, and people are actually playing it competitively, if you can believe that or not. And there were other games,
I
Ultima
feel like
4 and
people
5.
play everything competitively, even like that's the most boring shit ever. Somebody finds it interesting, but sorry, side note.
Well, it's like, yeah, everybody has different things, and these are only little homages. It's not to say that, oh, everything is essentially based off of it. It's like, no, these are these subtle and fun homages to things. What I was saying too is Ultima 4 and 5, which was essentially Origin Systems way back in the day. Richard Garriott, he was one of the first people to make these open world games, and that people don't really think about anymore, because then there's games like Skyrim, and of course going back, Oblivion, Morrowind, Daggerfall, and so on, all open world games. And to me, there's a certain amount of panache and fun by sneaking little homages into all these things. I mean, I put in homages to the Legend of Zelda kind of things. I mean, one of my characters'
I used to
names,
play Legend of Zelda when I was a little kid. Yeah.
well, one of my characters' names is Link in Book One. Now, granted, it's not directly an homage to Zelda in that case. Not to mention the fact that some people would say, well, that's obviously one. I'm like, hey, in The Matrix, there was a character named Link as well. So the point is, there's lots of these kinds of things. I even made, just for fun, I might as well say this on the podcast here, though, even though it's sort of giving a fun spoiler. I made an homage to Dominic Monaghan's goofy behind the scenes sort of DVD extra on the Lord of the Rings things, where he pranked Elijah Wood as he pretended to be a German journalist. And he had this one funny line, which people will probably know if they follow Lord of the Rings, where he's like, have you worn wigs? When will you wear wigs? This crazy thing that he did to Elijah Wood, and he was pranking him with an audio interview. And I just found that hilarious. So I'm like, I'm going to see if I can figure out one short little section in the tavern where one of the characters can talk about it in a different way, not wigs, but with hats. And I know that, again, that sounds a little bit like, what the hell is he talking about? I'm like, these are just fun homages to do to different projects and stuff out there that can be Easter eggs for other people to find later on. If nobody finds any of them or recognizes any of them, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the storytelling overall, but they are still there and they still exist. I even did an homage
Right,
to,
the references are a thing outside of your universe. People like connect with it. Go, oh, that was kind of clever.
exactly. It's just that kind of fun things to do to see if people. There's even a reference from Evil Dead. I literally have, and I probably shouldn't reveal this.
Which
One of my
one of the
characters
favorite, my
says,
favorite movies ever. Of them and Knuckles.
see, so you'll love this. One of my characters literally says, I'm like, I gotta lift it for fun. It's appropriate in the moment. It works. Where he's like, all right, you primitive screwheads, listen
Oh
up here.
yeah,
So, and he doesn't say this is my
that's
boomstick.
Army of Darkness. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's Army of Darkness. But the point being is like, I was like, I gotta have a Bruce Campbell reference in there. I love Bruce Campbell. One of my favorite films he did is actually called Serving Sarah, which was Matthew Perry. Rip to Matthew Perry, but Matthew Perry and oh, I forgot the actress's name. She's wonderful. It doesn't matter. The point being is, I try to do all that. There's even a reference to Terry Crews of all people in my book series. It's really small. Some of them are so subtle that you would never know they were coming. But I was like, I got to do these things because I want to do them, and I can find the right way to sneak them in where it fits with the general storytelling, or it's so like sidelined that it's like you don't need to know that it what it has to do with in the real world or anything like that. But I just find it like, to me, Dan, that's the most important thing about art, is that you are not yourself alone in a box. Like, I am the only creator, and I do everything myself, and there's absolutely nothing influencing me. I'm like, that's ridiculous. Video games influence you, whether you play them or not. The music you have heard influences them. Films, the books,
Well,
the
actually, everything
story.
you go through in life influences you. I think that's why, as people get
Yeah,
older, they turn to better creators and better writers. Like,
yeah,
unless it's like something like punk rock, where it's very much the fast and fury right in your face. If it's a more like, and I like punk rock, so I'm not talking down punk rock, but I'm just saying if it's more like an in-depth, like if you heard like the Johnny Cash when he did what's that cover from Nine Inch Nails, like I Hurt Myself Today, and like when he does the cover, like you just kind of you feel the experience, you know
Well, put it
You
this way:
feel
what
like
kind
you're
of
a part
world
of
would
it.
it be without Cash and also without Ingwe Malmsteen? Like,
Yeah.
what kind of world would it be without those? And people would say, Johnny Cash and Ingwe Malmsteen, they're completely different people. I'm like, yeah, I'm aware of that. It's like, yeah, they're awesome though. Like, and they did their own things. And so, isn't that the fun, Dan? Is that the variety is the spice, and it's really cool if people can draw from all sorts of different backgrounds or things and stuff, and kind of create something not only new in the sense that it's their own work, but that it's actually it's still just taking all of the old school ingredients, like again the wise wizard, the wise man who imparts his knowledge or her knowledge, whatever, to the young hero or heroine, and then usually dies or disappears from the scene and so on. And so the evil villain who seems so insurmountable, and his armies or her armies are so giant and cloned these armies that they seem impossible. Only later that they're defeated by the hero who's now grown way stronger than all of them. Like, we've all seen this. And you see it through Lord of the Rings. You see it through Star Wars, The Matrix, Harry
We,
Potter.
I think some of the strongest stories, like they go, like I knew George Lucas did this with Star Wars. He went back to like a bunch of old mythologies and
Yeah,
tales and
they're called
stuff.
The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell.
Exactly. Yeah. So he wove in a bunch of stuff that's like we're all kind of vaguely familiar with like the arc, and then he just like mainly changed the details.
Yeah, well, I'll say this is it's important, I feel, Dan, for people to look back at history and see where these writers really hit the jackpot on storytelling fundamentals and foundations. And if people are not familiar, they should look up Joe Campbell's or Joseph Campbell's books, The Hero's Journey or The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Or is it Hero of a Thousand Faces? I think I always screw that up. Whatever. The Hero of a Thousand Faces, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, whatever. They get the idea. If they read those books, which I wouldn't, I mean, they're not short reads, but they're appropriate reads for anyone who wants to claim to be a storyteller. They really need to know those books, and it's not for some uppity up reason. It's just because Joseph Campbell identified the sort of we've seen it before, and probably in visual formats, this hero's journey wheel, where it kind of shows the sort of slices of time as the hero goes through their journey. But that's like literally from Joseph's work. So it's like people should look up Joe Campbell and go read those books, and then they will probably find a lot of insight in the storytelling kind of, again, basics and foundations where they can apply them. They can say, hey, I pretty much need to introduce my hero like this, that, and the other. I have this wiggle room and I can do it this way, but I need to do that. Then, oh, I definitely need to have a character who does X and Y and Z. At this point, we have to have this, and then these things. I'm not saying it needs to be formulaic, but there are places where it's like, if this doesn't occur, think about how weaker your storytelling will be, right? Like, for example, Dan, one of the things that I will argue that we've been seeing that is missing from a lot of storytelling in movies these days, and in some cases books, is the hero starts super strong and then never has any real challenge. They just keep defeating everything along the lines, no big problem. And that is a huge breakdown in storytelling. What we want to see is growth, is adaptation from those heroes. So they need to start weak as hell, incapable of achieving their goals and their objectives, and get beat down really hard, in some cases
Well,
almost die, and then progress
I
from
think
there.
they could
Sometimes at
start
their
strong
limit.
too, but they need something that takes them down. They can't just be like the invincible Superman the whole time.
This is what I'm trying to say. So it's like, think about it. When you look at Frodo, and I'm talking about the beginning of, not now, whatever, Frodo, Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter, Neo. All of these characters started as lowly farm boys. I mean, Neo was a slowly computer programmer, but that just kind of, in a way, shows the irony of it. You're like,
It's like
oh,
the
wow.
modern version of a farm boy. Yeah.
Well, or the point is, it's like you're one of many, and you don't really mean anything in the long term. You could easily be replaced, and that's actually one of the points of the beginning scene where Thomas Anderson's called into the boss's office, and he's like, "You have been consistently late for this thing. Just understand that you either show up on time, or you are fired." or whatever it is. It's that moment where you go like, yeah, I guess I'll just be replaced by some other Joe Schmo, and I'm kind of a loser and I don't have anything. Harry's living in his grandma's basement, for God's sake, or whatever the hell it is. I don't actually know the perfect thing, but we all know, right? He's living in a stairwell or something, Harry Potter.
I'm,
And then Luke is on a,
I'm not a
you
huge Harry Potter guy, so I don't know.
well,
But
the point is, again, these are about maybe the fundamentals that we might be talking about. Luke Skywalker, of course, is a
he's a
farm boy,
farm boy on a
and
foreign planet, but a farm boy. Hmm.
yeah, and he's in the middle of nowhere doing the, middle of nothing with the middle of no one, and he's going nowhere. And he even says that when he gets up from the table. He's like, "Hey, Luke, what are you doing? We're not done with dinner. Where are you going?" He's like, "Looks like I'm going nowhere," leaves. And you're like, "Oh, that's such a whiny line," but you're like, dude, people can relate by if they think back to maybe when they were young and they maybe grew up in a town nobody gave two
No,
oh
I think that's one of the problems. Like that's one of the problems Marvel has now. Is like you need kind of like those realistic stories with like a character arc, because like if the person just starts out amazing, beat all the villains, they say amazing, it's like that's boring. Nobody cares.
yeah. And that's a trouble, by the way, of continuing with a character who has gone on the hero's journey, become strong, and then now they are strong. So you go, now where do we start them? Well, it's funny, in video games, you know what they do, like in Castlevania, you gotta take away all their powers. So you always start by default, even though you finish the last game with all these super power-ups, and you're like, I've got all the armor and everything. My favorite, right, in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, how do they solve that? You're like, oh, we have Alucard run on in, and then Death shows up and goes, "Ah, Alucard, you have grown way far too, powerful and arrogant," and takes all this gear away. And you're like, oh, I see. That's the excuse to make Alucard really weak and pathetic. And now you play the game and get all your stuff back. Well, it doesn't work that way in movies. That's why you had movies like Rocky, where Rocky had to consistently continue to meet opponents who were even more powerful, even though in the first film it's like, whoa, Rocky went the distance, with the Carl Weathers character, Rip to Carl Weathers.
Doesn't he
But
lose? Like he goes to the distance, but he loses. I'm
well,
not
yeah,
sure.
he either loses or it's a draw or something in the front. But
Yeah.
that's not the point, and that is the point in a way. Whether he wins or loses wasn't it? It's the fact that at the
That
end,
he made it.
Apollo's like,
Yeah.
"You got heart. I can't believe it. You went the distance." And then it's amazing to see that in two they're friends, and of course then Apollo, has his deal with Ivan Drago. And so it's like there's this kind of wheel that they have to continue to repeat in order to make those stories work. And I think Sylvester Stallone knew that, even though maybe some people might only still to this day credit him as a meathead. But I'm like, oh, that'd be wrong. Even back then, he's an intelligent son of a bitch. You know what I mean? Even Arnold, Arnold Schwarzenegger, it was also very
Well, he's a
intelligent. He
smart
knew
guy.
exactly
Yeah.
what he was doing. You know?
It's easy to stereotype people, but yeah, no, I think they're both smarter than their like stereotypes are played off.
Of
But
course. Yeah, they're not their characters. It's none of it
no,
real.
no. But I mean, let's go back to your stories for a minute, because we got to draw this to a close pretty soon. But I think some stuff's important. First of all, like, what's the length of the stuff you have out, and how can people find it?
Right, no, great question. So first of all, in terms of length, I won't go into too many details, but I will say this. Of all four books, spanning the four books, it's around 600,000 words and 350 plus non-AI illustrations, most of which I'm proud to say I did myself, and others I hired some wonderful artists to bring some things to life that I couldn't do myself. But in any case, people will see that these are it's a universe that I'm building here, and it's the kind of journey that you get drawn into, and then you can't remember where you were once you finish reading a few chapters. You're like, oh my God, all right, I got to go to work. I got to go do this thing. But I mean, that's the goal. I want to draw you into a completely new window and universe. And those are the things that also they take time. If one person were to read one chapter and then quit on it, I'm like, you're really not going to understand anything. That'd be like watching 5 minutes of a movie and saying, I think movie is garbage, and I bet I already know the ending. I'd be like, are you crazy? What are you talking about? You probably should do a little bit more than that to find out. So the length is, again, over the span of these four books. It's 600,000 words, give or take, and 350 plus color illustrations. Well, actually, not color if you get the paperbacks, because those are all grayscale, essentially. But if they want to purchase them, I only have them available basically via my website. And for me, that's just the best way to do it. I didn't really have any interest in placing them on like famous websites and all this other stuff. I just figured,
What,
what's the
like
point?
Amazon or Draft Digital or like
Well,
Ingram Spark or anything like that?
well, I mean, it's hard to explain, but Dan, is I have to do everything. I do all my outlining, all the writing, all the editing, all the formatting. Again, most of the illustrations, of which there are many, the website, the cover designs. I don't have endless resources like some people might, or someone might say, "Oh, well, so don't you have a traditional publisher?" I'm like, you don't just walk out the door and throw a rock in any direction and have someone say, "Okay, we'll be your traditional publisher." I mean, I don't think it would have been appropriate for my work anyway, which is why I did what I did. And part of it is because, again, I have 30 plus years of background in performance and theater and directing and sound design and video editing, all that stuff. So I'm like, I can do all that stuff. The one thing I'm not adept at, or even really excellent or good at, or whatever, is marketing. And I think part of that is it requires resources that are just outside of most people's pocketbooks. It takes thousands and thousands of dollars in most cases, and in some cases, it also requires just like a manpower and teams. So I don't have a lot of those things, but I would argue that if people were to visit the Diamond Dash Dragons website, uh, they can go down that rabbit hole or find out how far the portal of fire leads
Mm.
and discover on their own if they think, wow, this looks really intense. This looks really incredible. Or if they're like, I don't know, dragons, that's not my thing. I'm not interested. I don't want to find out. I'm like, that's fine. Everybody has their thing. Like we were talking about, like I loved uh, horror comedy. I loved Evil Dead and Army of Darkness. I loved Dead Alive slash Brain Dead. But some people would say, what the hell? Horror and comedy, those don't go together. And I'm like, well, I
Well,
mean,
everyone has their niche. I think people took a different look at dragons after Game of Thrones. Like Game of Thrones, like made people think completely differently about fantasy.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I will say also this, I should finalize by saying my dragons are essentially, they're an intelligent society dragons. So like they are not, I would say, anthropomorphized. Oh, I can't even say it. It's not that they're like humans, but you can relate to them in that way because they speak and they talk to each other, they greet each other. They're in a way sort of like superheroes that are dragons, but also sort of like, you might even think of it like they're these martial arts superheroes too. It's like it's hard to explain. Like once people see it, they'll be like, "Oh, I think I kind of get this. Like I like this." Like you won't be able to connect to them because they're dragons, but at the same time, you'll be able to connect to them because they have very real triumphs and tragedies and concerns and things that are going on that are happening to their people, their families and whatnot, and their planet. So it's like, well, you will relate to that. But of course, you cannot relate to the fact that they just, when they greet each other, they swoop on in and land and they're like, Dan, it is good to see you, blah, blah, blah. Okay,
Mhm.
this, that, and the other. Goodbye, and they fly off. And like, we don't do that. I mean, how can you wrap your head around the fact that you could fly pretty much anywhere you wanted at any moment? I mean, you can't, how can you wrap your head around that? You are not that person. You can get in your car and drive away, but how often, like you have that kind of greetings and farewells are far more elongated for us. Whereas with dragons, they might fly a distance, you might never see them again. Who knows? They might die. Who knows? So, this is the kind of things that I've kind of set up in the world of Diamond Dragons, and it is just that. It's another world, another universe.
Okay, what's your website? I want people to
Sure.
be
One
able to
more
find
time.
stuff.
Yeah, one more time. It's diamond-dragons.com. And again, people can visit the website, see the books and the kind of beautiful cover designs. Like, again, this is just, I guess I can dip out of frame for a second here. This is just one of, many, obviously, that I've done so far, book cover three. And again,
Okay.
it gives you that kind of, feel of like, well, what am I actually going to be looking at? And when they put all those books, alongside each other, they'll be like, wow, I'm really seeing like what's going on here. This is incredible. Such design details, things that I would miss if I just glanced at them. And that is just how I unfold all the stories. There's also all these hidden secrets in the books, not only through the text, but through the illustrations. I don't want to call it like a Where's Waldo kind of thing, but it's more like if you look carefully, you might be like, wait, what the hell? This has been here the whole time. I can't even believe it. Like I didn't see that on my first read, or until I started looking closely at these images, I would not have seen this. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's not by accident. To me, this is part of exemplary storytelling, is hiding things in plain sight, making homages and connections where you wouldn't otherwise see them until and or unless someone were to someday do an analysis and go like, did you ever notice that in blah blah Blade Runner 2049 yellow represents this thing and this red color is this, and it's like you will see this throughout the frames of the film, and they're correct. Denis Villeneuve used color palettes to help influence your mind, mostly subconsciously, obviously. But if you're astute enough, you can recognize a bunch of places where you're like, oh, this scene's all blue on the left side of the screen and it's all red on the other side. Interesting.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that's like a deeper. I think a lot of people don't even catch that. Like, obviously, colors influence your moods, but like people didn't like it wasn't on the surface where they go, "Oh, he's using it for that." But all right, man. So I don't want to go on all day about this. But do you have something else that you like some of the way that people should get a hold of you or doing any like conventions? Like, is there anything that they should look forward to?
Well, it's funny you mentioned conventions. I'll just quickly say that so I used to do a lot of conventions not related to Diamond Dragons, but everything when I did all my Star Wars style stuff. I was invited to all sorts of crazy conventions to perform, to host workshops in saber combat. I used to teach people uh, these moves. We'd give everybody a saber and say, "Okay, get with a partner. We're going to teach you guys some cool stuff." We would do sometimes we'd have a table, at different workshops and whatnot, or conventions, and that was a lot of fun. But now that I'm an author and whatnot, I'm mostly invisible in the sense of like conventions and workshops and things like. I don't actually know how I would ever, get into a. I've contacted my local libraries and other libraries and other places and whatnot, even the local news stations. I've never heard back from anyone's like absolute radio silence. So yeah, the only way to contact me would be through the website and my email. And just so people know, you're just contacting me. It's not an army of darkness. It's not a army of folks. It's essentially just me. And so if people have questions, they can do that. And I will also add that yeah, some of the emails I've received from readers, which at this point is very sparse, but I'm still very touching, Dan. Some people are like, oh man, this one character, Matthew, they reminded me of my uncle, and my uncle was this, that, and the other before he died, and they're very touching, Dan. The things they'd say, or they'd say, "Oh, I can't believe you killed this character. What the hell? I hate you," and it's really interesting to see that visceral thing, and I was like, I'm glad that you're having this reaction to it, and in a lot of cases, I'm telling people, I'm like, I did that for good reason, whether it was killing a character or the way a certain thing unfolds and makes you feel like you connect to them. I'm like, this is part of the storytelling is to move us, right, Dan? Like, what the hell are you and I talking for? Are we doing this just to, um, you know, part of my French, just jack off or whatever? It's like, no, we're here to inspire one another. We're here to influence, to give people another reason to say, hey, I want to find out more about Dan's projects. I want to find out more about Matthew's projects. What is this? Oh, another story about this thing. I can't wait. It sounds exciting. I want to experience something good. No one goes to the movie theater going, well, this movie's going to suck. I mean, I hope they don't, right? You want it to succeed. You want things to be good. You don't go into a film going like, oh God, what happened? This is terrible storytelling and it's a mess. Nobody wants that. It's bad for everyone, and it's unfortunate when it happens so often when it doesn't have to. And I'm here to try to say, hey, if go through all of this Diamond Dragons thing, like I almost guarantee people will be inspired.
Okay, awesome. All right, man. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, I'm sure there's so many different things, but it really depends. I mean, I guess I would just encourage people to kind of like if what I have shown and said sounds interesting, visit the website. There's plenty of free materials on there for people to see. They can read the first, I want to say it's the first 9 or 10 chapters, I forget which, of Diamond Dragons, sort of the rough ones, for free via a PDF that I've placed on my website. So
Okay,
there's
I'll put it up here, throw it out for the people that are just listening and not viewing it again.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's there's no harm. And so the point is like there's so many materials for people to kind of like find out, am I going to be interested in this? Do I think I will interest in? Plus, I did a pre-visualization video, which is very rough, but there's original music in Diamond Dragons. I'm proud to say my composers are great, and I've engineered some of the the music work myself. A lot of I hired a bunch of vocal actors to do several characters for this pre-visualization video, which it just covers like kind of like the PDF. It covers like the first 9 chapters of the book, although it's more the screenplay version for that. It's complicated for me to say here all at once, but there's an enormous amount of materials that go up way above and beyond what any traditional author would do, which is, do their books, boom, bang, gone. I mean, I've got videos, original music, the vocal work from everybody, the fact that I'm doing all the work myself, the cover designs and the formatting, the website. There's chapter artwork teaser videos, where I was like, hey, I could show some of the artwork just in sort of montages, fading, so that way I don't really ruin any of the story, but at the same time they can go like, wow, what the hell is that destination? What the heck? Oh, that looks like a dungeon, or whoa, look at that tower in the middle of the sea, just whatever. They can enjoy those things, which again, probably is unique compared to most authors. If I had to guess, I don't really know. I haven't seen a lot of videos and teasers and sort of trailers from authors and whatnot.
Okay, awesome. All right, man. Well, thank you for being on this, and I'll definitely shoot an email when it's up in the social media mindset.
Yeah, it was my pleasure, Dan. I really appreciate it. One day you'll have to tell me more about your own work. And like I said at the beginning of our chat, like, horror has been a pivotal, not necessarily benchmark, but like a nice foundation in the stuff that I like. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. It's great to have horror elements, even when it's not a horror film or story. It's like you still want a few of those elements going into things to make sure that audiences take it seriously, even when it's horror comedy.
Yeah. No, I agree. But all right, man. Well, thank you for doing this.